How are you, Joe?
Sunday. Thanks, Joe. So I'll run people through the headlines firstly. We are streaming this so you can watch us if that's your preferred method to consume all this. Otherwise, we're still here on the radio for the next hour. So Sunday Times, firstly, it has the test match from yesterday. False start, a big picture of James Ryan, who was brilliant again for Ireland. Wallabies win first test to end Ireland's 12-match unbeaten run, 18 points to 9. And then on the sidebar, Schmidt unhappy over ref decisions. That's the Sunday Times this morning. Sunday Mirror Sport have Get This Vardy Going. That's Jamie Vardy. We're raring to go for Russia, unlike Euro 2016, says England Ace. So he feels they're in much better form generally off the field as well as everything else than they were 2 years ago, which is an interesting line from him. I have the Sunday World here, and it's Royals rumbled. This is the Meath-Tyrone game yesterday. Tyrone winning after extra time. Meath fuming at ref after extra time defeat to Tyrone in Thriller is their lead. Have the Observer, who have a very nice actually pull-out World Cup wall chart, by the way. Definitely, I think the pick of the bunch today if you're looking for a wall chart. But it's obviously England and South Africa on the front page. Blitzed by Box, England blow 21-point lead and crash to 5th defeat in a row. It's quite an extraordinary 5th defeat in a row after Daly's error. So Eddie Jones under pressure at the moment. Back page of the Mail then. This is the hurling from last night, but it's Kilkenny. Cats are alive and kicking, and furious fits, as in Davy, lashes out as stunning Kilkenny comeback sinks Wexford. So Davy not happy with the referee. And again, Joe Schmidt frustrated as Aussies hold run. Then the Star, I have Gareth Southgate here. There's no limit. Gareth says, I won't stop players from dreaming. And then last two, The Sun, go with Snatch 22. This is Wexford and Kilkenny last night. Have a break, have a fit cat after tight win.
I like that.
You like that? That's our headline so far.
Would you like to come up with that yourself?
Yeah, it's the best of them so far.
Brian Cody has welcomed Kilkenny's 3-week break ahead of the Leinster final. Have a break, have a fit cat. And then Sunday...
Snatch 22 isn't bad either.
Yeah, because it was 22 points was the winning scoreline, yeah. I didn't really explain that. Sunday Independent, they go with the... Kilkenny line again. Kilkenny book Galway rematch. Cody's changes make all the difference. And on the very bottom corner, Schmidt weighs up his options as he bids to turn Tour around. There are your front pages. So, World Cup fever's definitely arrived. I guess that's kind of a starting point. It is the Sunday before the World Cup. It comes around but once every 4 years. So the papers have done their best. This is their chance to do their pieces. It's a very nostalgic time, of course.
It is a nostalgic time, Joe. I think for those of us who are old enough to remember Euro 88 and remember where you were and remember what you were doing, remember how you got to... It's hard to imagine that this was the first championship that we ever qualified for. So there's a very good piece. There was a very good piece yesterday on the back of the World Cup fever about Euro 88 in the Irish Times. It's a good piece. It's by Frank McNally, and it's very nostalgic for those of us who remember. There's also great coverage of David Dimbleby's in Russia, giving his view of Russia. There's great coverage of Messi. What else did you see, Johnny? There's a lot. There's Southgate piece.
Yeah, the Southgate piece as well. David Walsh in the Times. You know, I think when Southgate kind of in club management, he was probably viewed as being. Certainly probably viewed as being too nice to be a proper football manager. But I think international football maybe requires a different role, and there's just there's something strange about this England team. There's not much hype. They don't have a lot of obvious stars. And I was actually at the News Talk Roadshow the other night where there was some talk about going into England camps and how divided they were. And how there were really like separate camps within the England
within the team.
The players. So like they wouldn't really mingle together, and like the Northerners and the Southerners.
Yeah.
Really?
We're not talking about Ireland here. We're actually on about the England team.
I had no idea. I didn't. Were English teams normally quite unified?
I guess they were in the past, but of late, sort of in the last sort of around, I suppose the Gerrard Lampard type era. This apparently was a thing. But Southgate has come in, and
I did talk to an Irish rugby player who was playing over in the UK recently, and he was saying the difference between Southerners and Northerners in the UK is something he just could not get over.
In Britain,
nothing, very little in common.
Yeah,
incredibly different people.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a symptom of what.
Which is because he often writes about a potentially united Ireland down the line, and we actually ignore that in Britain.
I have a vested interest in this particular fight. You know,
but the Southgate thing is interesting, and it's also just the fact that.
And is Walsh making the point that he's actually tougher than we think, or that his softer side is what England need?
On that, he says his politeness shouldn't be mistaken for timidity. When the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson talked about the possibility of racist attacks in Russia, Southgate said he wasn't interested in what Johnson had to say about Russia, and by the way, he'd be better off dealing with stuff that happens in this country, which is impressive in itself. But he then speaks about how he dealt with the Raheem Sterling issue, because Sterling was a bit late coming into camp, and it was around the time of that absurd fascination with his tattoo.
Yeah.
Which itself was, you know, kind of just befitting this stupid era that we live in, where this stuff should even be talked about. But in any event, he kind of took Sterling aside, just had a chat with him. And Sterling, and this to me is all about man management. It's just like he took him aside, and Sterling was like, I really appreciate the way you handle this. I just find this England team is really going to be intriguing, because...
Do you find them likeable?
I find them less dislikable than other teams, you know. And
as far as you're willing to go.
David said to me before the show, we traditionally, obviously, certainly in the Republic, we don't, and in the North, but we don't want England to win at football, and a lot of that has to do with, I guess, memories of the
understatement there.
Memories of Lansdowne Road, and I was in national school at the time, I remember, and you know, that wasn't particularly nice, and also the fact that their fans maybe aren't particularly likeable or don't come across the way. But this England team, I don't see why you'd have a big issue. There's no fanfare about them. There doesn't seem to be much ego there. And Southgate is definitely a likeable guy.
No, it's very worrying when the English team is humble ahead of a World Cup.
Something's off.
It might mean that they could go quite far.
And they're given no chance.
On the nostalgia point.
Yes.
So, goodbye to the world out there. The World Cup is here at last. That's the headline on Declan Lynch's piece. A man who will retreat, I presume, to his lair for the next month. If you live to be 100, I guess this is the thing about World Cups. He kind of captures it really nicely. If you live to be 100, you will remember some of the events that are about to take place in Russia over the next few weeks. They will stay in your mind when almost everything else about your life at this time has gone. That's what I find anyway, that when somebody mentions 1982 or 1988 or 2010, my memory zooms in on a few fragments of the World Cup that was happening in those years, giving me some sense of where I was in general at the time and what I was doing. Music does this too.
Yeah.
It's very true.
And smell.
And I think he's really right. And Declan is one of the great football lovers, and has got kind of an encyclopedic knowledge. And this is about his nostalgia, about watching the games and where he was. And I remember the 74 World Cup final, which was Holland against Germany. And I remember being on our road, and I remember one of the lads' dads renting a coloured TV, okay, for the game, and the whole road coming in. And the worst thing about it was not only did they rent the coloured TV for the game, but they took it away the next day.
Oh.
So, but it was that sort of thing that, and I remember the 78 World Cup, being in national school, and being kind of intrigued at Argentina. Where was this place, this unusual Latin American place, knowing nothing about what was actually going on.
Yeah.
And the team were glamorous, and they had long hair, and they had Mario Kempes, and they had these extraordinary sort of players. And again, that was a time when South American players didn't play in Europe.
Sure.
They didn't play in England.
Incredibly exotic.
So they were very exotic, and the way they played, and they'd passerella, and then the fans, they used to throw all sorts of paper down from the top, and we'd never seen anything like this. And it was also the time difference. And so you'd stay up late to watch Argentina. And yeah, Holland were the kind of European favourite, but there was something really exotic about the Argentinians. We, of course, had no idea what was going on in Argentina at the time, as a lot of the stuff talks about now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I was saying to you before, I was in Argentina 2 years ago, and I went to see Boca and River Plate in the Boca Stadium. And it is an amazing event, because the first thing is the River Plate fans are not allowed in. They are not allowed in because they have a propensity of throwing chickens from the upper echelons of the stadium, which would actually probably kill you.
Frozen chickens.
Frozen chickens, right?
Yeah. Much harder.
Think about this. And I remember getting a ticket and sitting beside this kind of very sophisticated-looking Italian Argentinian grandmother. She had the kind of purple rinse hair, all the jewelry on, looked incredibly posh. She's sitting down. She's obviously a season ticket holder, and I'm sitting beside her. And she's very, very formal. And she's like the Donna of the place. And the teams come out, and just out of her mouth just comes "Hijo del puta," son of a bitch, for the whole thing. I'm looking at her. So there's something for people like me when you watch the World Cup. It's the Latin Americans that make it. And I suspect for this generation, it could be the Arab teams that make it. So for people like me, it was the Latin Americans were different. They could win. They played differently. They looked differently. I think now you look at the Arab teams could do very, very well because they're incredibly skillful.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the nostalgia and you mentioned 74 because Eamon Sweeney has a big piece. He says, a life measured in World Cup finals. And it's like very sweet in many ways. So 74 he calls initiation, you know, and the first cut's the deepest and Holland hooked me on football. And he goes through Argentina and Kempes and, you know, 02, the day Roy Keane went home was the day his first child was born. So he doesn't really remember Saipan. But he has a lovely thing where throughout 74 and 78, his father would talk to him about, well, look, you never saw Brazil in 1970. So, you know, you don't really understand. And, you know, I guess we're linked with childhood in World Cups. He says, my father is dead a while now, but if there is an afterlife, his neighbours will grow familiar with the Brazil 1970 lecture over the next few weeks.
I was in receipt of the same lecture from my dad.
Right.
And there was very much a sort of a sniffy attitude to anything. Like, so Maradona was kind of nonplussed. You know, Socrates wasn't a particularly good player. My father just eulogised the Brazil team of that Mexico 70 World Cup. And I was saying to Johnny, he used to take me up to Milltown to watch Rovers. So you could imagine how Rovers were compared to a man whose standard of football was, you know.
And live football was so rare as well, you know. But my memory of 1990 is Jimmy McGee commentating on the Scalacci goal and just the absolute agony of the 7-year-old. And then in 94, our local pub in Newbridge in County Galway ran a promotion that it was only going to be, during every Ireland game, it was only going to be £1 a pint, and I was regretful that I was only 11 at the time.
Yeah.
You know, but little things like that. But the one memory I have of 90 is Scalacci's goal and just the agony of that. And because there was so little football on.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like and even if you go back into the 80s, less and less again. So
that was agony though, the Scalacci. My cousins disliked their dog so intensely that they renamed it Scalacci.
Yeah.
And the dog was called Scalacci from then on. But I remember in 1990 that just sense of this is an Irish team. We began to realise after a while that they were actually really good.
Do you buy into that most cliched of economic theories?
Of course, cliched me. You're going.
Because I want to get on to David Dimbleby in a second, but the great cliche I see in every single programme which reminisces about 88 and 90 is that in some psychological way or otherwise this contributed to the Celtic Tiger. Well, we felt better about ourselves as a result of the football team. Surely the Celtic Tiger would have happened anyway.
I think it would have happened, but there's a very, this is now I'm going into my Nerdistan world of economics. There is a very, very interesting chart, and that's, you know, economists are defined by our love of charts, and it actually looks at Irish GDP per head going back to 1920. And what you see is nothing really happens. The economy continues to flatline until around 1989, 1990, and it actually takes off completely. So you could, if you were trying to be culturally sophisticated, put the two of them together. So there is no doubt that there is a coincidence of the this economy, or the economy going up with the football team doing well. But I think it could be hard to prove, but we should try to.
I suspect more babies were born as well. As
babies were born. That's true. 1994 was a baby boom. There was a baby boom in 79, and there was a baby boom in 1994. So there's no doubt of that. But my memory is much more of the team being really very good, and we didn't really appreciate it. I remember in the Euros, Gary Cook, you know, of Après Match.
Yeah.
Gary Cook and I were in college at the time, and it was March of '88, and football at the time was not popular. People forget that there was around the Heysel time. It was not a popular sport. It was very unfashionable. So in Trinity, it was even more unfashionable to like football. And Gary Cook, I remember coming up to me in the arts block and saying, Scotland are playing, and if they win, we will go through. And at this stage, no Irish fan had really any expectation of going through, because those of us who'd remembered previous campaigns and getting beaten by Belgium and dodgy decisions, whatever. And Gary Cook and I went to the Suffolk Inn, you know, the pub just down the road, which was tiny at the time. And some guy, I can't even remember his name, some Scottish guy, scored a goal against
Mackay, wasn't it?
Was it Mackay? Yeah. And then this odyssey began and didn't stop until 94.
Because that game wasn't really on television. The Suffolk's one of the few places that had managed to get hold of that somehow very famously.
Really?
Yeah. No, nobody saw that. You're one of the few if you've seen it.
Yeah, because Gary and I went, and he was always, you know, it's funny when I see him do an Après Match because he's a huge football supporter. And we managed to sneak into the Suffolk and watch it on, unlike now you have like big screens, but it was like an Owlad's telly above the bar, and that was the beginning of the Odyssey.
The only issue I have with 1990 is I think it created a love of football for a lot of people, but we were playing poisonous football. Like it was so hard to watch. If you watch the Egypt game now, you honestly would
that's Dunphy-esque. The pens are going down.
Yeah, but if you could eat nails for 90 minutes rather than watch it. It was so bad back in the days of the back pass where you could back like that was football at its worst. And I do wonder, did we think in Ireland henceforth, yeah, it's okay to play like this because we've been left behind badly in the years since. I wrote about this myself today, actually, in a little piece in the Business Post, and this is very crude now, but during the week I saw this little video of a deer who escaped from her mother, a fawn escaped from the doe, and basically...
how necessary is this anecdote?
This is quite tangential. But
this is called the desperate open paragraph of the hack.
The doe was looking on as the fawn actually came up to the camera and actually stood in front of the humans, and the cameraman or camerawoman was absolutely astonished that a deer would come this close. And I made the point that the fawn didn't learn that she should be afraid of humans. This was something that she'll be taught eventually, and we weren't taught how to play football properly. It's not that we're not able to play.
Even I wouldn't do that.
In Ireland, we weren't coached how to play football properly at all, and that's why we're years and years and years behind. The Dutch couldn't take penalties in the World Cup, so they worked harder for years. We shouldn't have this notion that we can't pass the ball, because it's not a culture thing, it's that we're not coached properly.
Well, I agree with that. Before we get into that can of worms, and I do want to get into David Dimbleby, because it's one of those strange things that happens before a World Cup, which is good. You used the word, it's a coincidence, potential. You deliberately used the word coincidence that 1990 marked the GDP gross domestic
product. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, okay. So the amount of money in the country.
The amount of stuff.
Okay. So you said that shot up in 1990.
And it really did shoot up.
What were the other reasons for that? It must have been increased travel. There must have been other stuff going on. It's not just the World Cup.
There's a lot going on.
Berlin Wall's coming down.
Berlin
all of this
Wall's
stuff is
coming
happening.
down.
So it's not Italian 90 is my point.
It's not Italian 90, but you could shoehorn Italian 90 in if you wanted to on the basis of.
But let's be factual.
Be factual. No, it's not Italian 90. It's coming. This upswing in the economy is coming for quite a long time. And in actual fact, it could easily be related to all sorts of cultural factors as well as just economic factors. But it is interesting if you look at the chart. Those who would decide that there is that moment where it definitely is around the upswing in the fortunes of the soccer team. But I remember being there in the final game of '94, which was hard for people to appreciate. Paddies like myself going to Florida, and it was midday, and we're playing Holland, and they were so much better than us. I remember being at the game, and the Dutch fans were just thinking, this is an Irish team that might have been good, but they're on their last legs, and they really were. And
when Clivert scored the goal in Anfield, that was probably the end of the chart here.
Another game I was at. Then I decided I've spent too much money following this team around, getting lost.
So I think we glorify that era a bit too much because we were left a long way behind afterwards.
Yeah, but still in all, it
was great for the country.
Yeah, it was great. It was great for football in the country that an Irish team was on the world stage. I mean, I just thought it was one of those things. And again, it's nostalgia.
Yeah.
But nostalgia is interesting as you get on a wee bit.
I'm sure. There's loads of nostalgia in all the papers. Like every columnist seems to feel it's the time to share their childhood memories with us. I think if you like the columnist, you like the pieces. Like Rod Little telling me about it, I'm not really interested, but you can pick and choose your poison. So in the main section of the Sunday Times is the kind of thing that you see before a big event like a World Cup, something slightly unusual. The holes in Putin's defence, and there's a picture of Vladimir Putin kicking a football. And David Dimbleby has a BBC documentary called Putin's Russia on Wednesday at 9 o'clock, and there's a piece here that Dimbleby has written for the Sunday Times. You read it. I know you spent time in Russia, David, and you got your own views on our understanding of Russia, but you might just give us a general synopsis of what Dimbleby has found in Russia ahead of this World Cup. Certainly, the sanctions are damaging the country's economy massively. Like he makes the point at one stage that Russia is home to 144 million people, but the economy is only 2/3 the size of Britain. The president is forced to rally voters by posing as their only protection against a hostile West, a narrative that depends on constant provocation to demonstrate that hostility. He is a dangerous man in these dangerous times. That's his conclusion at the very end of a 2-page piece.
I think that Dimbleby's piece is typical, very typical of the British journalist who knows the square root of nothing about the country. he's very perplexed as to why Putin is popular. This is the whole basis of his article is, I'm a rational Englishman and I really can't understand why this chap is so popular in this country I know nothing about.
And especially with the young. In Russia, the young are conservative, not radical. This was confirmed to me by Levada, a person he spoke to. The one independent polling company in the country is Levada. It has found that the young are more pro-Putin than any other age group because they've known nothing else.
Well, I was in Russia. I had a bizarre thing many years ago. I decided I wanted to learn Russian. And I went and I lived almost like going to the Russian Gaeltacht, like with the Ban and Tea. I would live with a family in a place called Novi Ruza, which is about 100 miles to the west of Moscow.
Right.
And very, very small town. There was Stary Ruza, which is the old place, and Novi, which was, if anybody's travelled to the Eastern Bloc, this huge apartment blocks, kind of unpleasant enough place. And what struck me about Russia then, it was in 1991, and Russia was collapsing, and there was no food. Mm-hmm. The entire economy had collapsed. It was being taken over by gangsters. The Soviet Union was collapsing by the hour. Now, we were not that aware of that because there was a news blackout. But what we were aware of was it was almost impossible to get food for that day, let alone 2 or 3 days hence.
Right.
So if you've lived through that, and then you think about Russia through the 90s, and I went back a lot during the 90s, and recently as well, but in the 90s, the Russian economy, the society was being mortgaged off to the oligarchs, the Abramoviches of this world. And you are a Russian who's brought up with a system which was delivering not just basic economics, but also delivering a sense of pride about the Soviet Union. That is, not only is it shattered, but that society is dismantled. And the dismantling of that society is cheer-led by the West. Mm-hmm. Okay, when you're aware of what's going on, and you see family members going into prostitution. I mean, this is what was happening. There was no money, no food, no future.
Just a quick tangent. When you say the country mortgaged off to the Abramovich types, the oligarchs.
Yeah, that was very, very clear to me.
What does that mean?
Well, what happened was that what Russia does and has always done is export commodities, right? So timber, petrol, everything like this. And what actually happened was there was a privatization where everyone in Russia was given a certain amount. There were little vouchers. So Joe Bloggs gets £5 worth of the assets of the Russian state. And what the oligarchs did was they amassed all these vouchers. They got people going out and say, I'll take your vouchers and I'll give you cash. I'll take your vouchers, give you cash. They paid minuscule amounts for this. Okay, but there was 2 exchange rates. There was the internal exchange rate and there was the external exchange rate. And the external exchange rate meant they got hard dollars for... The reason I know about wood, because I was quite close to what was happening in one of these small factories, but it was a big factory by Irish standards, small by Russian standards. And what ultimately happened is Yeltsin needed the money of the oligarchs to fight a quasi-democratic election. Mm-hmm. And his deal was very simple. He says, I will allow you take everything and you support me. And it was very, very clear that the country was being ransacked by a very small amount of people. And when you were living there at the time, you could feel a fatalism. And it's an extraordinary thing to do, to feel in a country that loses hope. You know, one of the really interesting about living in Ireland in the last 30 odd years is there's a lot of hope in this country that tomorrow is going to be better than yesterday, that we're going somewhere, okay? When you're in a country where it loses hope, it's extraordinarily terrifying because people think anything is better than this. So Putin comes in 1999 after having been the 5th prime minister anointed by a constantly drunk Yeltsin. So you're a Russian, you're thinking about this, and begins the process of re-establishing what Russians wanted, which was law and order, which was stable food prices, which was a sense that we were actually stabilizing the ship. And he begins to build. Now, people who have not experienced this have no sense of the relief. I'm not talking about pride, I'm talking about the relief of somebody turning a country around, a country like Russia. Of course, in recent years, you know, Putin, the Russian view is, for example, in Ukraine. So if you talk to Russians, they say, in Ukraine, the West sponsored a coup d'etat against a democratically elected president, Yanukovych, which is what happened. And we have a coup d'etat sponsored by the West on our doorstep, and you expect us not to react? And you expect the Americans to be able to put their troops in the Baltic states, in Poland, in Turkey, and you think we're not going to react? So if you look from Russia, what you see is an aggressive West over the last 20 years encircling Russia militarily. And when Putin stands up for you, you think at least he's trying to re-establish Russian control.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is this idea that he stopped what was wholesale looting. Russia was becoming, people don't remember this, Russia was becoming, you know what they call a failed state? You know what they say about Afghanistan as a failed state? Russia was becoming a failed state. And the West was cheerleading this.
In the post-communist era, the 90s.
From 1991 to 2001, let's say.
Because to Dimbleby's credit, he does talk to Maria, who is 45, and she talks about the 90s and the Yeltsin years and remembers price controls lifted, no food on the shelves, and just the horror of it. And she talks about
Joe, you've no idea how terrifying it is.
Yeah.
And I used to come back to the family, and you know, you're a Westerner, so you know you have a passport out of here. So you know that this is not really your life. But we'd come back and chat at night, and I remember the mum and dad, they were school teachers, and they were really, really quite well educated, like a lot of Russians were. You know, they were members, low-level members of the Communist Party, because that's how they got the gig, right? Because they were sufficiently kosher to be allowed to have a Westerner stay with them. But you know, like any family, you get to know them very, very quickly. And the conversations they had about their kids and their future were really terrifying.
The stuff, though, that he mentions about the kind of these quasi-military schools where, like, kids as young as 7 are going in, like, it's deeply, deeply worrying.
But again,
I know that might be just focusing as part of, like, it supports his narrative. Well, but if Putin is genuinely doing that, like, this is complete, you know, echoes of Hitlerjugend, like entirely. And
again, look, I'm not saying that this regime is the nicest regime in the world, but what I'm saying is this is one of the reasons The Economist magazine gets things so wrong all the time, because they think that the world can be solved by two rational Englishmen sitting down with a glass of port doing the right thing. And that's not how the world works. So the Dimbleby article, to me, sounds very much like, how could you possibly like this chap Putin? Because after all, we believe that he is a quasi, he is financing Russia today. He is financing, and of course there's the poisoning issue in Salisbury that Dimbleby reflects. But what I'm saying is...
The sense Dimbleby gives me here is that to a point he explains Putin's popularity, though not as well as you just have actually, but by talking to the Marias of the world who talks about how terrible the 90s were. But Dimbleby's thesis here is that these are the reasons Putin is popular, talks about him as well, famously taking control of the media in 2000 when he came to power. And a journalist talks about how every Friday the heads of the 3 main channels go to the Kremlin to receive their marching orders, what you're not to say, what you should say. So complete control of the media. But Dimbleby's point is, such are the geopolitical relations at the moment that the sanctions are really hurting Russia, that the economy is wobbling very, very badly, and that this is a big issue for Putin
this
now.
Is a big issue because sanctions only hurt the middle classes, as a general rule.
Right.
Which is why the sanctions worked in South Africa.
Okay.
Because the white people were the middle and upper middle classes. Which is why sanctions don't work in, for example, Serbia, because the middle class have been destroyed. So you can have sanctions for years against a population that is very poor, but because they're very poor, they don't buy foreign stuff, right? Whereas where Putin has a dilemma is that the middle classes support him. And it's their lifestyles that have been undermined by the sanctions. But again, this is Russia, previously the Soviet Union. I would not underestimate the ability of Russian people, and this is where economics and politics gets interesting because it's culture, Russian people to put up with privations if they are instigated from the West.
Okay.
Because this is part of their narrative. If you read Solzhenitsyn or you read Pushkin, it's all this idea of Mother Russia, that we are a deeply Slavic, we are the center of the Slavic soul. And our world is a constant conflict with the forces of the West. So if you read about Peter the Great, for example, or Catherine the Great, or any of the fantastic Russian emperors or empresses, their entire geopolitical strategy was how do we develop in Russia without being swallowed up by the West.
And a last question for you then on all this. We've seen the amount of money spent on Sochi. Record money, like tens of billions, and all of it, like, well, actually this article touches on the extent of corruption. It seems to be just everywhere in Russian society. But so we've seen Sochi, and now we have the World Cup upon us. Where, if in any great way, does something like the World Cup fit into the Russian story, do you think?
Well, I think it fits into the bread and circuses story of empire going back to the Romans. You know, this is the Colosseum for the modern day.
Is it about legitimising the state, or is it more just about showing we're powerful?
It's showing you're powerful, but it's also, don't forget, Russians love football. Okay?
Sure.
You know, this is when we went to that particularly small place, the only thing that bonded us when I was there with 3 or 4 others, we couldn't speak Russian at the beginning, was football. So the lads would turn up and there'd be foreigners there and they'd say, come on, let's have a play. And the interesting thing is that the Russians almost also changed the name football to sound more Western. They used to call it nogomed, which means playing with your feet, right? And because nogo is feet. And they turned to football, again, to be more Western. But I think that Russians love football. It's a proper footballing country, proper footballing nation. It's not Qatar. You know, this idea that, Russia and Qatar are similar.
No, the Qatar situation is different.
And it's definitely, to answer your question, it's like, why did the military junta in Argentina risk bankruptcy, which subsequently happened, to finance the World Cup? Why did the military junta in Mexico do exactly the same thing? It's because it's a huge prestige project to kind of adolescent men.
Yeah. I should let people know in the hurling, as we approach half-time, that Limerick are cruising against Waterford, 2-13 to Waterford's 5 points. So Limerick are up by 14 points as they go into the break. And Tipperary are in control against Clare. They lead by 7. It's 1-10 Tipperary, Clare 6 points. Elsewhere in the Leinster Senior Football Championship semi-final, Laois 6 points, Carlow 3 points as they go in at the break as well. So, to move off the World Cup briefly, like there's loads of other good stuff there. Tony Adams has loads of really interesting comments, but I don't want to just labour the football overly, and time is against us. Pat Smullen pops up in the Sunday Times, Johnny. You're obviously a racing fan. I dare say this would have caught your eye. He's with Don McLean.
Yeah, I'd actually kind of half considered doing a piece with him lately, but I pulled out of it because I was like, he was at the Curragh, and it was one of these events that really brought Irish people together, Irish racing people together, and that he went to the Curragh for about 2 weekends ago, and it was a huge deal, and it wasn't, I suppose it was a little bit unexpected, because when the news of Pat Smullen's cancer came out, it was one of these kind of glorious Irish things where...
For non-racing aficionados, who is Pat Smullen?
So Pat Smullen would be like probably one of the best jockeys in the world, but he's a real hard-working, no-nonsense guy who doesn't court publicity. He was champion jockey up until last year. He was beaten by... But he's kind of, I suppose, if not perennial champion jockey, he's been champion jockey a few times and works for Dermot Well, which would obviously be a huge job. And he's 40 years of age, which, as a jockey, it's old, but it's not
still
terribly old.
Yeah.
So when news emerged that he'd a tumour, it was one of these strange things in journalism in Ireland, in that when something of this magnitude happens, there's just a collective shutdown. It's like, we're not going to go into this, even though it was kind of all hush-hush, like, this cannot be good. It cannot be good. And the rumour was pancreatic cancer. And pancreatic cancer, as anyone will tell you, is extremely bad, as we understand it to be. So there was kind of silence about it then, and as a journalist, I never pursued it. I sent him a text and said, best of luck, and he got back to me or whatever and said, thanks very much, because he's a complete gentleman. Nobody pursued it. And then lo and behold, he turns up at the Curragh for one of the classic weekends, and he's giving interviews, and everyone was just, this is just fantastic to see Pat Smullen. So Don McLean talks to him in the Times today, and he basically has chemotherapy every 2 weeks, and he's just an amazing man. He says, you know, when he initially got the prognosis, he said the initial test came back clear, white cells, everything looks fine. This is Francis. All he was saying was they can do whatever they have to do, because I have to be back riding for the first day of the turf season at Naas, and that's Pat Smullen. He's very driven, and you know, he had issues for a while, but I think he thought he had gallstones or something like that, and the tumour had been causing him back pain for a long time. So anyway, this was in March. So March, April, May, June. So 3 months have passed. And I thought this was very interesting. He said, in the last 2 months, I've come to realise there is more to life than riding horses. I realised that life was passing me by, really. Francis, that's his wife, the kids growing up. I just wanted to ride in every race, every day in Ireland, England, around the world. Of course, I was doing it for the family, but I was doing it for me too. My mindset, my approach to life has done a 360-degree turn. Now I can enjoy it all, enjoy the kids. Now, you can say he's putting a positive spin on a grim situation there, but I think anyone who's in any walk of life should read that. And we never think about what we're doing, because we're just doing it, and life becomes next week's roster.
Yeah.
You know, and we never think. You could be in a job 10 years and you never think about leaving it because, you know, it's just my job and I'll earn my, you know, wages at the end of the year. We never think about the greater picture, and it takes something like this maybe to give him the time to think, and I'm sure he has a lot of time to think now. But he is just an incredible man. You know, maybe Don's piece doesn't kind of clarify what the prognosis is long term, but that's probably consistent with, you know, the collective respect for the man, and as an Irish racing journalist myself, whether it's lack of bravery or respect or whatever, I can see where he's coming from. But
there's probably a line where just privacy kicks in.
And also when you get an interview like this, you will go out of your way to kind of accommodate the guy who's been so good, in this case Pat. But he and Francis Crowley, obviously himself, and Kevin O'Ryan, the agent, and Aidan O'Brien are married sisters. I just can't say enough for Pat for how he's dealt with this and how positive he's been. It can only be absolutely horrendous, but he looks great, and we're all just praying for him, I suppose, that he comes through.
That's page 17 in the Sunday Times with Don McLean. So, yeah, we wish him well. The prognosis isn't clear, but certainly he's talking about positivity about the future and how he's going to live the rest of his life, the next 30, 40 years of his life. So hopefully that all happens for him. Where are we on next? Boom. Oh, we should touch on the GAA then, actually.
I'll leave that to David.
Well, as a GAA aficionado...
is there any reason you never... have you gone through life here without having any interest?
Really
is it just because you're posh? Is that?
No.
Too posh.
It was never really... where I was growing up, it was a soccer road, and there was one GAA fan on our road, a character you might know called Des Cowell.
There we are.
Des was our neighbour, and Des's dad was the local school teacher, and he was a Kerryman, and he was very involved in trying to persuade our road in Monkstown to play GAA. And we were all soccer kids. GAA it was the FA Cup final for us. It didn't even when the Dubs were doing well, it was in the 70s, it was still very much a sport that we didn't get. But Des was, as you know, was a tenacious character. So he decided that we would have, it doesn't even sound right, the Windsor Park GAA club, okay? And we would actually go and play GAA. And he decided that our first 15's outing, the first game we'd ever play was against O'Connell's, the GAA club from just up in the north side. And they not only did they hockey us, but they actually made us very aware that this was a game for men, and not us football pansies.
David is obviously he's married to a northern woman who would have come from a Protestant background, which is fair to say, right? We have a big issue in the GAA here. Arlene Foster is half talking about going to the Ulster final. So the GAA was set up basically as a cultural kind of affront to how British Ireland was becoming. That was in 1884 or whatever it is now. But we still have all this pageantry of nonsense that is, you know, like the national anthem is one thing, but like playing these kind of questionable songs from the Artane Boys band before the game. How would Arlene Foster go to...
questionable band.
But,
with a questionable backstory.
But does the GAA has singularly failed to attract a certain population in Ireland to its, you know... So we're far more likely to have like Irish Nigerians or Irish Arab descent playing than we are Irish Protestants, basically. And this is it's completely failed in that regard. And I think this cultural nonsense that they still cling on to is just completely anachronistic. So if Arlene Foster goes, she'll be warmly welcomed by everyone, you know, at the game. But it'll be a very tough experience for her, you know, and that's just, you know, anyway.
Wasn't she tweeting the other day about Fermanagh?
She may
Arlene Foster, whose maiden name is Kelly, who I suspect, if you go back far enough, was probably...
But she...
au fait with GAA. No, my just thing with GAA is...
Hold that thought for 1 second, because I have to do an update in the GAA. Tommy Welch, you've watched the first half of Tipperary against Clare. Tipper in control. Tipperary won 10, Clare 9 points.
Oh, Joe, if you're anywhere near Semple Stadium if you're out shopping in Lidl or walking the dog, drop everything you're doing and get over here quick, because we've some second half in store. We were talking about Tipperary before the game. Ger Lucknan talking about energy. It's been all energy from Tipperary. The Tipperary supporters are manic. It's been an unbelievable first 32 minutes from Tipperary. I was wondering, would there even be point in play in the second half? Next minute on comes Tony Kelly. The Tony Kelly show in the last 5 minutes, and suddenly Clare are back in the game. Pierre Duggan had been keeping him in the game a slight bit with frees, but like, they couldn't win the ball, either in defence, midfield, forwards. It was just all Tipperary. Pádraig Marjo, he's having the game of his life. We were wondering, what would it be like? We said Cottlebard will give him that energy if he's playing. The first 2 balls came into Pádraig Mar. He stormed out, drove the ball 60 or 70 yards down the line. The boys in the forward line, Callan, although he's not playing brilliant from open play, he's chasing everything like a dog. John McGrath is playing brilliant. The Bonner is doing what the Bonner does. He's the king of the solo run, the master of that art. He flicked down a ball for Billy McCarthy that gave him that cushion of the goal. So it's been some first half, Joe, here in Temple Stadium.
Okay, Tommy, great stuff. Back to you soon. Let's go to Dahi at the Gaelic Grounds, where it's Limerick 2-14, Waterford 7 points, 13-point gap at half time. Dahi.
Yeah, fascinating first half. You pity Waterford again. Shane Fives had to go off after 8 minutes with an injury. That was a huge blow to them. And then they conceded one absolutely brilliant goal. Garage Hegarty was on the end of a crossfield ball from Tom Morrissey. Hegarty instead continued with his run. The hand pass was thrown to him. He took it without breaking stride, solo through him from 14 yards, absolutely buried in the ball. And the second goal, the complete opposite. Stephen O'Keefe, Waterford goalkeeper, failed to deal with a long ball in from 80 yards, came out to it, touch on the hurl, bounced off the hurl, went sideways. Graham Mulcahy kicked it on, ran after it, and then from a yard out just hooshed it over the line. So, you know, Waterford to me are running on fumes at this stage, and justice never say die belief. But my God, watching Limerick up close and personal, every single Waterford puck out, they broke down the Waterford puck out within 10 minutes. Every short puck out that was hit to either Conor Gleeson or Noel Connors, they absolutely deluged in on top of them and forced turnovers or poor clearances. So Waterford decided to go the other way and just puck it long. I'm watching every single Waterford puck out that's coming down. Every Limerick player within 30 metres of it is sprinting in and around it, and they're picking up all the breaks. The Limerick forwards, not one of them is holding their position. Waterford are playing with just 6 backs. Right. Well, the way the game was meant to be played, I suppose. But the movement from the Limerick forwards, none of them are holding their positions. Their first touch, Keane Lynch with 3 absolutely gems from the middle of the field. O'Donovan and himself are just lording things there. The Brick Walsh, I watched him off the ball there, trying to exhort his colleagues on to greater efforts. Derek has gone quiet the last 15 minutes. Even Dan seems to be kind of resigned to the fortunes. Limerick are so impressive here today, Joe. Every single ball has been fought for. As impressive as I have ever seen Limerick. It's difficult to see at this minute where Waterford can do it, because there's still a lot of heart, a lot of guts, a lot of know-how in situations like this. This is a different Limerick, an outstanding Limerick performance in the first half. Okay, Di, brilliant stuff. Back to you shortly. And then finally, for the time being, Laois against Carlow. It's not a high-scoring affair, Anthony Moyles. Laois 6 points, Carlow 3 points. A classic?
Oh, a classic, Joe. I'm just glad, Joe, the press box here is in the shade, because if it was in the sun, I'd say I would have fallen asleep in the first 5 or 6 minutes. It was absolutely turgid stuff. It took 5 minutes to actually get a shot on goal, one shot on goal, which was actually blocked, and a free subsequently happened for Laois. They stuck it over the bar. Carlow are playing with literally 13 men behind the ball. They leave Broderick right up front on his own, and Dara Foley, the number 11, will sometimes stay at 11, even at sometimes he's been behind the ball. So literally it's Broderick in about 60 yards of space, and it's all on the counter-attack. But it's all a bit helter-skelter, all a bit individual. You know, there's no players coming on, there's no link play as they come through. But Laois, to be fair, have been quite cynical in that respect. They're stopping runners, which the referee hasn't picked up on at all. A few fellas just being taken out of it, coming down to try and support the man. Laois have been good, very efficient. Kingston has been excellent in. He's given anything that has been really, you know, a bit of top class. Paul Kingston has provided. He kicked one beautiful score. He's been double teamed, but he's still managing to get free, cause a bit of havoc. And they've been really patient. They've obviously realised, they've watched the videos that we've talked about. They know Carlo, will try to, get around them, and they've just been really efficient, getting the right fellas on the ball for scores. Carlo, again, lots of players in around the defence, but still committing silly fouls, which Leeds have subsequently stuck over. So, unless Carlo changed things here and at least put another 1 to 2 players up front, they're not going to win this game.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. Back to you shortly. We're taking a very short break, and then more on the papers with Johnny Ward and David McWilliams in just a second.
Off the Ball on News Talk. News Talk Breakfast.
Kieran, the great poll is in. Which crisps are the most popular?
Tayto crisps are the most popular. 44% say Tayto, 20% say Kyo's, 16% say O'Donnell's.
I don't think you can do a comparison. It's apples and oranges here. You've got to look at your standard Tayto bag versus your King crisps, and then the O'Donnell's and the Kyo's. They're separate. I'd have a separate competition for them.
And what do you go with,
never
Pat?
cease to
Hold on,
surprise
he hasn't
me.
answered.
King crisps.
Oh, you're King.
Oh, you're King.
And maybe it's a Dublin thing then.
News Talk Breakfast.
In association with AIR.
Back tomorrow on News Talk. National College of Ireland's programmes in business, computing, finance and education are now enrolling for September. And to celebrate, News Talk and National College of Ireland invite you to attend the In Conversation with Lunchtime series this June at NCI's IFSC campus. Hosted by News Talk's Bobby Kerr, the events will deliver real-world education in your lunch hour. Starting with Moya Doherty, RTE chairwoman and Riverdance co-founder, on Thursday, June 14th. See the full lineup and reserve your free place now at ncirl.ie. The NCI In Conversation with series, proudly supported by News Talk.
When the Peugeot 3008 SUV was named Irish Car of the Year 2018, it came as no surprise. Indeed, the judges had made one of the safest decisions ever, because the 3008 comes with a very impressive list of safety features as standard. Driver attention alert, lane departure warning, dynamic stability control, speed limit recognition and more. Test drive the Peugeot 3008 today. Never has an SUV gone so far. See Peugeot.ie for details.
When it comes to uniforms, the early bird beats the school rush. So before the water fights and the summer holiday sleepovers commence, get them ready for next term. Then let the fun begin. 20% off school uniforms in store and online now. M&S, spend it well. Terms, conditions and exclusions apply.
Hi, I'm Ray Houghton. 30 years ago, I put the ball in the back of the English net when we beat England in Stuttgart at Euro 88. Inside Tuesday's Irish Independent, in a special magazine, relived the best moments from Ireland's first major tournament as we reprint the newspaper coverage from that memorable game.
The Irish Independent, sports writing in a league of its own.
Bruce Betting are one of Ireland's leading bookmakers. Download the iOS app today to see why Bruce Betting are giving you more for World Cup 2018. Bruce Betting, your World Cup bookmaker. In store, online, and now on your phone. Please gamble responsibly. See dunlewy.net.
This is Brian. Brian has just managed to break his business into a number of new markets. How? By getting his company an internationally recognized certification in quality standards, giving Brian a much greater advantage over his competitors. Yes! Lucky Brian. Find out how you too can get your business on the road to greater success with an internationally recognized seal of approval by visiting nsai.ie today.
Some things never change, but we have. Topaz is changing to Circle K. But don't you worry, we'll still have Miles Fields, Simply Great Coffee, and our delicious food range. You should try my favourite, the falafel wrap. It's the best ever. I'm Karina from Circle K Nutgrove. Circle K, new name, same people.
More rashers, Barry? Yeah. Actually, Henry Denny invented the rasher, and his sons sailed across oceans to teach people how to cure bacon.
Wow. And their journeys were probably dangerous too. I need to be more courageous like that. Starting now. Pass me my keys. I'm taking the car into town.
But city traffic makes you nervous.
Not anymore. And I'm going to Parallel Park. Go on, Barry. Drive into the city like a fearless negotiator of tricky spaces. Seize the Denny.
There's a new place to buy Peugeot in Dublin, Sandyford Motor Centre. Call in today and test drive the 182 Peugeot range. If you're in the market for a new van, check out our award-winning partner, Expert and Boxer range. Visit sandyfordmotorcentre.com for more details. Sandyford Motor Centre, the new home for Peugeot in Dublin.
You should definitely call your ex at 4 in the morning. Sure, she hasn't heard from me in ages.
I think you should tell your boss exactly what you think of her. She'll appreciate your honesty.
That boa constrictor would make a great family pet. The kids will love it.
Not all advice is created equal. At financialbroker.ie, we're the experts in professional, impartial financial advice. So for advice on life insurance, pensions and investments, and everything in between, find your local financial broker at financialbroker.ie.
Off the ball. This is News Talk.
Welcome back. So we're reviewing the Sunday papers. If you're just tuning in, we've been over to half times in the 2 o'clock throw-ins where Tipperary are beating Clare 110 to 9 points. We have Limerick, who are going to beat Waterford, barring a miracle, 2-14 to Waterford 7 at half time. So it's a 14-point lead for Limerick. And Laois Carlow, not a high-scoring affair at half time. Laois 6 points, Carlow 3 points. We have David McWilliams here in studio and Johnny Ward as well. We're going through the Sunday papers. We've touched on a lot of the World Cup stuff. GA features, obviously, there's lots of previews of today's action, which is maybe less of a talking point for this afternoon, and a few other bits that catch the eye. I guess Shane McGrath and Paul Kimmage are along similar themes, give or take. I think Shane McGrath is bang on the money here with this situation. He's talking, Johnny, hostile reaction to an umpire's human error is hugely damaging. And so he's talking about the game last week where umpires have to be escorted by Gardaí off the pitch. And we saw last night in Meath that, again, Gardaí had to come on the pitch and escort the referee off. It is this like culturally enshrined, acceptable thing in the GA that, look, well, managers are going to lose the head and they can go in and the Gardaí have to come on and escort umpires off. And I can't think of another sport in the world where it's just like...
It's a disgrace.
If this happened in any other sport, we'd be talking about bans, big bans.
Look, this is... I didn't get this. Are you telling me the referee has to be escorted by the Gardaí?
It's happened twice in the last 8 days. So it happened last night.
But are you telling me it's the manager is the threat to the referee or the fans?
Well, the fans do come on the pitch. Yeah, but managers, Dan Shannon from the management team went over to the umpires last week, and last night Andy McEntee decided he wanted to go and have a word.
And this is over like a disputed
decision.
Just a small decision or pivotal decision?
It's a pivotal decision, but it doesn't matter. Like,
doesn't matter.
It's a human error or not a human error, and it's tolerated.
I didn't realise, and the cops are called to protect.
But as a kid, when I played,
I'm sure if the cops weren't there, an assault wouldn't happen. Like, it's a precautionary thing, but that is the tone of the atmosphere.
You know, the unbelievable sketch about...
No,
like,
it's not new.
The unbelievable sketch about where you have that, like, you know, firebrand, like Father Jack type character, like banging the hurl off the ground, and then he ends up the sketch by saying, you'll know all about it next year when you're under 14. Do you know what I mean?
It was those guys. Remember you asked me why I didn't get into GAA? It was those people that terrified me as a kid. Yeah, and they were everywhere.
It shouldn't be tolerated. Like, I mean...
The point is, David asked, is it new? It's not new.
No.
And that's the point. We're still here.
And if Arlene Foster did want to go to the final, I would suggest she goes to a hurling game because it's a lot better. And
she won't be able to see anything.
Well, this is the point. So Tommy Conlon has a piece in the... This is very valid.
Come back to that in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So Shane McGrath's point, it's only when Croke Park starts protecting its match officials and ruthlessly punishing those who insist on treating referees, umpires disrespectfully that this rotten problem can be addressed.
Agreed.
Here, agreed. It's such a no-brainer of a topic.
I didn't realise this.
It's really ugly.
I know it's odd, Johnny, but you can be Irish and not follow the GAA.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But I like it now, the fact that the umpires have been threatened by the managers. This is a new story for me.
Well, Paul Kimmage is talking about... Well, there's a recent interview here that Jerry Gilroy did with Stephen Wallace, the former Offaly manager, where, again, his, as he called it, misdemeanour, but, I mean, a punch was thrown on the sideline, was something he wasn't really keen to engage with until Ger forced him to eventually. And then Kimmage has written a couple of pieces in the last few weeks about issues at local level, and they've posted, I think it's a very legitimate complaint. A week ago we talked about this, so I won't go over it again, but they posted a list of important questions, he says, to Tom Ryan, the president, and he says the silence again has been deafening. And who can blame him? He says, why take responsibility when nobody holds you responsible? Why be accountable when nobody holds you to account? It's how the GAA do business. There is that feeling at times with the GAA that there is an element of kind of, just, you know, these things happen, you know, let's just get on. Why would you make a fuss at times?
There's players on the pitch still get away with too much stuff totally irrelevant to actually the game and skills of the game.
You're not selling this to me, lads. Come on, we're talking about Messi.
I convinced him before we came on that he was going to a League of Ireland game.
I'd very happy go to League of Ireland.
I'm not so much sure I can get into a hurling game.
I'm thinking Messi versus...
But there's trickle-down economics here, because what happens with Andy McEntee going on the pitch last night, who was in tears last night, the manager. I get he's upset, but like Joe Schmidt wouldn't lose control. Joe Schmidt wasn't happy with the referee yesterday. His comments there about the referee today in the papers, he would never go on the pitch and confront a referee. Yeah. Andy McEntee did. And the trickle-down economics is that at the under-8s game, what do you think's happening?
Not only that, but like how difficult is it to referee a Gaelic games?
That you know, on the sideline of all sports, you get the crazy dad.
Sure,
right? You really do, and I've come up close to them in football, and you know, it's the dad who actually believes that their young fella is Messi, and the young fella has got 2 left feet, and it's all very, you know, and then
crazy moms as well.
And you get the crazy moms. So I don't think GAA is the exclusive preserve of the crazy mom and the crazy.
That's a fair point.
But you know, what's interesting about GAA, next week I'm putting on a book festival in Dalkey, a big literary festival, but Dalkey has become the home of hurling.
Cool.
And this is, it's a very interesting story, what has happened to GAA in South Dublin in particular. Almost the sort of the middle-classisation of GAA. And this really intrigued me for a long time, is why was this happening? Why were the big Southside clubs becoming dominant and beginning to win in a sport that I can tell you hurling was never played.
When you were growing up there.
The Cooley used to be called the Mitchells years ago. When I say it was played by a couple of families, you know, it's like footballing tradition or sport tradition kind of tends to be in families. So yeah, there was a knot of maybe 20 families locally who were GAA people, but in general it wasn't the sport in our neck of the woods. Now it is, and this is really interesting. And I decided to do some research on it. And I went back, and what I found was a very, very interesting research paper done by the ESRI in the 2000s, and it showed that the most successful demographic in the country who profited most from free education were the sons of small farmers in the country, but in particular in East Galway, your neck of the woods. And what you see around South Dublin is it's their kids who became the professional class of South Dublin. So their parents do extremely well in education. They move up 3 or 4 social brackets. Their kids do extremely well in education. They become the professional class. They move into South Dublin where they didn't live before. They push a lot of the old South Dubliners out to the Gories of this world, to down around Arklows, etc. And they bring with them, it's a sort of a generation thing, their cultural heritage, which is GAA. So I find that really fascinating. What you've actually had is a demographic change in the professional class, which might have been a rugby playing class in the past, and are now a GAA playing class.
So free education, say in the 60s, the farmers' sons and daughters become
teachers. Okay. Their kids become doctors and lawyers.
They go into South Dublin.
They go into South, and their kids are the Ushins you see at Coola.
And with the GAAs in their DNA,
and the GAAs in their DNA, whereas in the past, those professions were controlled by the rugby playing class.
Yes, okay.
And now what you see is it's a GAA professional class it's the echo of their grandparents that you're seeing now.
And interestingly enough, football is very much on the wane in Dublin, it would seem, in terms of the actual players in the national team, that it's way down on what it used to be. And in the city now, football, as I would call it, is struggling to fight.
When it was once the hotbed, and the DDSL was the biggest schoolboy league in Europe, and it was football. Now, if you do walk around Dublin, you're every bit as likely, if not slightly more likely, to see the kid walking up the footpath, bopping a sliotar on a hurl, as opposed to with the football.
Absolutely.
That change is visible. It's very interesting. That's fascinating.
But it's all to do with sociology and how the country has changed. And, you know, you asked about you were talking about earlier on the Celtic Tiger and whether the football was the catalyst for it. But if you look at the last 40-odd years, what you see in Ireland is amazing social change and amazing upward mobility across the board. And what we're seeing as, and then you pick these things up in culture, in sport, and what people do on a Saturday. And this is why I think it's fascinating to look at the world through those sort of lenses.
So the fact that you saw almost South Dublin become GAA Central, that was almost the starting point for, well, why has this happened? And that leads you down the economic route.
Years ago, I used to play soccer for Dalkey United, and Dalkey United and Coola share the same ground, which is basically Hyde Road in Dalkey. And I have an interest in this because my dad and a couple of mates set up the soccer team years ago in the 50s. And it's very interesting because the football lads, soccer lads, gave the pitch to Coola, who didn't have a pitch at the time in the 60s. And when we were kids playing soccer, Coola was really a small GAA club in a big football area. And also a big rugby area, but much more of a soccer area. And I've seen Coola, when I took my own kids to play soccer there, I've seen Coola grow. And I remember sitting on the side and saying, why is this? How has this happened? And then you trace it, and it is actually all to do with...
Any Coola personalities at the Dalkey Book Festival?
There will be... Well, I mean, Mr. Des Cahill is always... No, but at the book Festival, which I will plug now, which starts on Thursday, is... What we try to do is we try to take as many writers from all over the world and bring them back to Ireland, because sometimes I think we can... Well, we don't hear these other voices. So we've got interesting voices coming of, Lionel Shriver, very, very fantastic, brilliant American writer. She's coming, Steven Pinker, brilliant American, he's a psychologist and a fantastic writer. Then we have Robert Fisk, who you probably know. We have 4 Booker Prize winners coming. Michael Ondaatje, Anne Enright, Roddy Doyle and John Banville. So it's an extraordinary event.
And a few Coola GA persons.
What's the website, David?
It's www.dalkeybookfestival.org.
Great. I was at it a couple of years ago. I recommend it totally. It's a brilliant thing. It's great to have stuff like that going on, actually. Because everything's like, I mean, I'm all for mindfulness and yoga and food, but actually there's a gap in the market for some stuff like this, some cultural stuff, some art stuff.
And it's amazing how people respond. Like we sold 800 tickets the first year, which was only 6 years ago. We'll sell 14,000
I believe it, yeah.
It just grows really quickly.
People have an appetite for quality and intelligent discourse.
And the interesting thing is, I always think that I've always thought, like, there's the person who loves their GAA and loves talking about hurling also likes talking about history and economics and
Why do you think you're here?
Literature.
Why do you think you're here? I mean, it's true. It's not like anyone tunes in and says, I'm just into sport and nothing else.
That's what I'm saying. And when I remember, that's what I love about sport now, is that when I was a kid, it was kind of, sport was in a ghetto. Yeah. And you did your soccer, or you did your rugby, or you did your GA, and that's what you did. Whereas the mind that's interested in all this stuff is also interested in listening to a Booker Prize winner talking about their experiences, or a psychologist, or an economist. So it works. I mean, we've been really pleasantly surprised by how much demand
and
appetite there is for it.
You mentioned Tommy Conlon there has a very good suggestion. I read Tommy's piece today, Johnny, and I thought, I completely agree with this, and I've never actually had this thought before. He had awakened something I'd known deep down.
You said that to me, and my first frame of reference was Joe's sidelines, and he mentioned that because you can't see the ball.
It's a great opening line about Joe's sidelines.
Yeah, so in trying to explain the technical components of his fabled ground stroke, Joe Canning talks about genuflecting into the shot. This was, I think, a year or two ago when he was actually explaining how he did it. When he converts those sideline cuts into points, everyone watching genuflects before him, which is a nice start to the article. But the art of, there's a debate about whether it should be 2 points or 1 for a sideline cut, which is obviously for another day. But Tommy makes a very good point. Even though we're now in the era of HD, hurling is badly served by. And I've often said this: you cannot experience hurling without going to a game. And I never thought one of the reasons is actually because it's not a great experience watching on TV, because it's hard to know what's going on. Do you know what I mean? And there's
Johnny, you're talking to the converted here.
The argument about the light sliotar at the moment and that you can hit the ball too far. Maybe they should they change the colour of the sliotar, or certainly how are we going to work? And Tommy's point is like, how do we work on making this better for viewers in terms of cameras, in terms of just basic things that are. His point is that we're not selling it to a 21st century audience. Hurling isn't a blind spot. Soon viewers will go missing, just like the ball. I don't think that's going to happen, because I think hurling's in a good place, but it's probably not particularly well served in terms of a TV experience.
No, well, he made the point the shot tracer in golf works quite well, and he wonders, has anyone even thought about doing that?
Very simple. So yeah, I'm not a golf fan, but like you don't appreciate Joe's technique there, because you see the ball, it goes missing in this milieu of a crowd, and then And how many times are we looking at a score by looking at the umpire because we can't see?
Yeah.
We're looking at the umpire to appreciate a score, or we're trying to judge by the crowd.
Yeah, now the shot tracer on golf works when they record it, put it through some fancy machine, and it comes out with the shot tracer.
And do they just slow it all down then?
No, they play it, but like a digital line traces the ball in the air.
Oh, yeah,
so you see the curve.
Yeah, you see the curve. You see the skill.
The skill. Yes, they might. Sometimes they keep it low and the wind are high, and all these different curves.
What you're saying that the skill is missing in the straightforward.
So to hit a sideline cut is so absurdly difficult. And Joe will aim for one post, curl it over to the next post. Yeah. But you can't. In fact, the ball is basically missing for you, and you might have two angles and neither really shows it.
So my point is, though, with the shot tracer in golf, you couldn't do it live, but you could see Joe's score, and then you could say, well, have a look at that again with the shot tracer.
And most people are going to watch
then
that.
You'd see it.
There must be an app for that sort of carry on now. You know,
I know.
Somebody's just thinking there's an idea.
It's a great piece. It's a brilliant point.
That's interesting. But it's interesting. This morning I was up early about another sport that doesn't get much coverage, but is actually the fourth most popular sport in Ireland, cycling.
Oh, and I went to see. Can you hold that thought 30 seconds? I've got to do an update. I'll let you make
cycling
that point.
Update or GA update?
GA update, unfortunately. No, fortunately, I'm all over the GA. What are you, I'm not with you at all here. Tommy Welch, you're watching Tipperary against Clare. How's it going?
Superb start to the second half here again, Joe. Peter Duggan is just after scoring from a free from the 21-yard line. We're back to 5 points again here. There's been some moments in the second half alone. Paddy Marr scored a point from out around midfield underneath the newsstand, lifted the whole of Thurles, not alone Semple Stadium. Then on the other side, Jack Brown, because Clare are back in this game since 10 minutes before half time. Well, 5 minutes before half time. Jack Brown, the corner back, after huge physical confrontations in the full back line, they won the ball. I said in the first half they weren't winning their own ball. They're winning their own ball now. Jack Brown came down like his own clubman Tony Kelly from Ballyhay on the left hand side over the bar, and the whole Clare crowd lifted up. It's a brilliant game. He's just after winning another free here again. So 5 points in it, 114 to 12 points with 10 minutes gone in the second half.
Great stuff, Tommy. Back to you shortly. Let's go to Dahi Regan, who's at the Gaelic grounds. Limerick 2-18, Waterford 1-9. Dahi, any sign of a miracle?
Well, there's no sign of a miracle. The Waterford improved the scoreboard by 3 points, but it's still an absolutely fascinating second half. I mean, Waterford, as you expected, have come out and have thrown the kitchen sink at Limerick, but Limerick's ability to tackle is extraordinary. Waterford like to get a ball and they like to play heads up hurling, take a touch and see where they're going doing it. The nearest Limerick player, whether he's 5 metres away or 20 metres away, they're sprinting to the nearest Waterford player in possession, and it's hurrying Waterford clearances or anything that Waterford trying to do that's proactive. The tackling, the hitting from Limerick, but Waterford are taking it and they will not lie down. They got a great goal 12 minutes into the second half from substitute Tommy Ryan. He got the end of a high ball, everyone went up, he stayed running past the ball as it was dropping, everyone missed it. He had a clear run in and goals and buried it in the back of the net. It's ebbing and flowing, the intensity levels are massive. You can just forget the scoreline right now because it's just thoroughly enjoyable to watch. Limerick very, very strategic, leaving a lot of space, and Waterford are staying intact without dropping any man back. So 48 minutes gone in this game. It's 2-18 to 110. Limerick are winning, but it's thoroughly enjoyable game of hurling.
Okay, Dahi, great stuff. And then finally, before we go back to finish off the papers, we have Anthony Moyles watching Laois Carlow. I see there's been 1 point in the second half so far.
No, Joe, come on, don't be just, Dahi there's, he's hammering her up down there. It's actually improved here at the start of the second half. Carlow have actually committed a few more fellas forward and they've been attacking in droves. But they've kicked 3 really bad wides in the last kind of 5 or 6 minutes. So they've been in the ascendancy and they really should be ahead now. Broderick actually, for all his skills and his accuracy, he kicked a 21-yard freed wide off the deck, which is killing for them. But hopefully they're on the attack again. They have another free now. He's one right out on the 45, probably about 5 or 6 yards into the sideline, which he'll probably stitch. But they've started really, really well second half, and they're going at Laois. And if they can continue on this, it'll make a right game of it.
Okay, 6-4 Laois at the moment. 6-4 Laois.
That's it, yeah.
Great stuff. Thanks, Anthony. So, as we begin to draw this to a close, it feels like we've been here for days in a nice way.
In a
nice way. You were about to talk about those weekend warriors wearing their lycra.
But it's very interesting, the mammals, the middle-aged men in lycra.
See, I guess part of your job is to think up the good nicknames.
Well, that's not mine. That was.
What was the one you came up with? Give me some of your big hits.
I can't remember.
Okay, Celtic Tiger is obviously all time.
No, but that
will never be beaten.
But that was not me. That was described to me. But
was it?
Yeah.
Was there something about a patio?
There was a deckland. There was sort of a place, a phenomenon. But I was watching these guys. I was watching this.
I'm going to force you to answer this question.
There was a breakfast roll man.
There was a breakfast roll man.
But I was watching these guys today, and it's really interesting. It's one of those sports that is hugely popular. It doesn't get much coverage at all. Some Tour de France will get coverage, but the amount of people who are spending enormous amounts of time and money on these bikes is extraordinary. It's a cultural. It's the new golf. I know you like golf, Joe, but it is. It's what you see is a lot of people my age, middle-aged folk, deciding, I'm going to actually try and stay fit. And if you go, particularly around Wicklow, but if you go, I was over in Connemara recently. There's these enormous amounts of people, hundreds of people out on bikes. It's again what I always find interesting is why is a sport growing so quickly, and where is it growing? And just you should maybe take a little look at it, Joe. It's really interesting. Reach a conclusion yet, or are you at the start of an investigation? I'm at the start.
Okay.
It's fascinating.
So is this like a South Dublin Hurley-esque beginning of an investigation?
Yeah,
maybe?
like where does that start? Like how does society? It's like that tipping point. Why do societies abandon one sport? Like for example, the way cricket was abandoned here in the 1890s.
Yeah.
And then take it up again. It's interesting. In cricket, a taxi driver the other day, a chap called Imran. He was picking me up. I was going to the airport and I was chatting to him. He was from Pakistan. And I said, did you enjoy the cricket? Ireland against Pakistan. He said, oh, it's fantastic. And then he told me about, he plays cricket for Carlow Cricket Club. And Carlow Cricket Club was disbanded in 1892 and was reconstituted about 3 years ago by Rohingya Muslims who live in Carlow. And that's what I love. So you have this mushrooming of different sports, cycling, cricket, all these things. In the big world of the football and GAA, that's so dominant. But I always find these minority sports really interesting. Totally. I don't know why they happen.
Yeah, young Fionn and Fia can be whatever they want to be.
And the country's blurring into the centre and nobody cares. You can play rugby, you can play GAA, you can cycle, you can play cricket, who cares? And that's something that was definitely not the case 20 years ago.
No, it was a tribal thing.
It was a tribal thing.
It really was.
Yeah. And now
Galway United are going to be taken over by Saudis.
Well, this is a story in itself. A story in itself.
We don't really have time to touch on the rugby. Neil Francis and Shane Horgan and a few others are writing about it. Certainly there's a sense that Australia were the more skillful team and had a bit more about them with their hands in the ball, but there's obviously some frontline players to come back. Shane Horgan thinks Dan Levy will make a big difference in particular. I know your other half was desperately waiting for the rugby conversation, which is now not happening.
She was. Well, it's all right. The fact that I was on here talking about hurling at one level will be a first for her.
Yeah.
I was just telling John that I used to present the breakfast show here on News Talk years ago. And my knowledge of hurling was so bad. My producer was a fellow called Joe Chops Walsh. Do you know him? Joe Walsh, producer from Kilkenny. And Joe from the Hurling Beyond, it was middle of July, middle of August, be all hurling. And I'd come to the sports and I'd be fine on the soccer, everything. And remember, Joe's just talk to me, just say, shut up now. Just say nothing, right? And he used to write down the questions, all right, from a Kilkenny man who had an encyclopedic knowledge of hurling. That was in his blood. Yeah. And the hardest thing for him was to do was to distill his knowledge into the why, who, where, what things. So he said, look, in broadcasting terms, leave the hurling out of it.
Yeah.
But you never know, Joe. I might come back in another incarnation.
Called Chops as well.
Chops is a great one. Yeah. From a family of butchers.
Yeah.
Someone said they just tune in and I presume this is you, just heard the only person speaking sense and the truth about Russia. I'm from Eastern Europe with close relations in Russia. Can I congratulate your guest? I'm sick of hearing all that constant bashing of journalists who have no idea what they're talking about and just repeating everything they hear in the mainstream media. Somebody says of the GAA situation, the Gardaí coming onto the field only adds tension to a mild situation. Let the referee stand confidently and answer or not answer the questions. Dragging a ref off the field looks worse, says Darren.
An element of truth in that,
there is, fair enough. But maybe just stay off the pitch. Let the referee come off the pitch, surely. Somebody says, lads, when you're in the heat of the moment during the match, passions are heightened. I'm not saying it's right, but after the game, when you're at home and think about the game rationally, you have a different opinion. This has been happening for decades. That could have been written unofficially by the GAA. That is the attitude.
Try to convince somebody to be a referee, like.
Control yourself. Like this, I did it wasn't right.
Yeah.
Week after week after week.
Behave respectfully.
Behave like an adult.
Behave respectfully.
I know it's upsetting that you've lost and the referee's frustrating you, but behave like an adult, surely.
The one thing we should learn
You've made it immeasurably more interesting for me now. I quite like this idea.
You're going to tune in at full time.
No, I'm actually just going to arrive at GA clubs at the end of games.
To see
right, you can send me a text and you can tell me.
Dave McWilliams is here again. It must be nearly over.
Exactly. I'll just mooch in at the end. Perfect.
So we'll see how it goes. I mean, there's been 2 in a week. Maybe it'll calm down now, but we'll see. And here's the why did cycling become so popular 10 years ago. Finbar in Cork. His theory is the recession, too expensive to pay for gym symbols.
Finbar, I'm robbing that.
Interesting. Have David on every week. Great listening.
That's really interesting.
It is cheap. Once you get your bike, it's free exercise.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Was that Finbar in Cork?
I suppose it would. The bike is expensive,
but it's not.
But then it's free exercise.
It's free exercise, and you don't have to pay every month or every year.
But okay, jogging was completely free. That hasn't exploded more than cycling. I'm just pointing out holes in Finbar's thesis.
Yeah, but I like it. You've got to start. You've always got to start with something and then work from there.
Maybe it's from the modern world we live in as well, where we're all on laptops and computers all the time, phones and everything.
There's something going on, and that something is always more interesting than just the sport itself.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we're probably only beginning to understand the effects of the recession. Things like the last 10 years, it's so monumentally terrifying for everyone and changes
and
so many things.
Traumatic for a lot of people.
You do wonder what the net results of it are going to be. Maybe it's men in lycra.
Maybe it's I can't. I just had an image, and we should keep that boxed off.
Johnny, thank you for coming in.
Anytime, Joe.
Much appreciated. And Dave McWilliams, what a real pleasure having you in. It was great. Do it at least once a year for us, and we love having you in.
Would love to.
The website again for the Dalkey
Book Festival.org.
Yeah. DalkeyBookFestival.org, and that starts on Thursday.
On Thursday night.
Same day as the World Cup.
Same day as the World Cup.
Okay, that's ambitious on your part.
Well, absolutely, absolutely.
We'll take a short break, and then we are, Dave McWilliams will be happy to hear it. We are GA heavy for the rest of the afternoon.
Off the ball.
On News Talk. Tech Talk.
With Jess Kelly.
This week on Tech Talk, personal trainer Carl Henry joins me to talk about the best tech for your health and the benefits of banishing your phone from the bedroom. We'll put the new